Welcome then, all people, in person or remotely, for the second Tuesday of the month chapel, which in our new chapel format is the spiritual practicum chapel. And for this semester, I'm leading for the spiritual practicum what I call the scripture circle, which is non-directive, semi-contemplative, free discussion engagement with sacred texts. We began with a reading from the Gospel of Mark last week, and this week we'll turn to a text from the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. So I said that I want to go farther and farther afield, recognizing my orientation, my religious tradition as Christian, but acknowledging the sacred texts come in a variety of forms. I haven't gone too far afield in going to what is still part of Scripture for me. But as I told Meg, what I did for my scripture selection for this occasion was to turn to the Jewish lectionary in order to find the text, whereas previously I turned to the Revised Common Lectionary used by Christians. And the Jewish lectionary has two readings, the Torah and the Haftarah. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So the Torah, obviously, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, and the Haftarah will be readings from what are called the Nevi'im, the prophets. I'm not sure if there are any readings. I think there are some readings from the writings as well. So texts like Song of Solomon, etc. So this is from the Haftarah reading from the book of Isaiah, which we'll turn to shortly. For those who may not have participated previously in the scripture circle, then an introduction to the basic process. We begin with an opening ritual, in which case will be the lighting of the chalice and a brief prayer. We engage in 2 readings of the text interspersed by a time of silence for you to reflect on what you have heard and what stands out for you. So after those 2 readings out loud, interspersed by silence, we will enter into the time of open sharing. What do you notice? What stands out for you? What challenges you? And I'll lead us with some prompts for reflection before each time of silence. This is a time in which, to use a Jewish metaphor, we turn the diamond of the text. And as we turn it, different parts of the diamond, different surfaces reflect the light in different ways. And so we're invited on a journey of self-discovery through active engagement with the text. And to refer to a principle that I named last time that came from a book written by a Buddhist teacher on engaging the Bible. A key rule for this process is we get to question everything, but we don't throw anything out. So we engage it honestly, fiercely, compassionately, sensitively, in the hopes for gaining new perspective from the text and from one another. So what I'll do at the moment is hand out the reading to everyone face down, because I don't want people to read along or read it in advance. I want you to be able to hear it out loud first. Lisa's in the car, so won't be able to read it later, but you'll get to hear it carefully both times, and feel free to engage in discussion. Can I get 2 volunteers for the out loud readings? Can I get Elle for the first one and Arliss for the second? So when I cue you, you'll be called upon to read. And the rest of us, in silence with eyes closed, well, not in Lisa's case, but with some kind of focus, we will attend to the text. Let us begin first, if there's someone who can light the chalice for us. I do have the matches here. We'll have the standard chalice lighting affirmation. With the kindling of this flame, we reaffirm our commitment to accept life's gifts with grace and gratitude, and to use them to bless the world in the spirit of love. And in the spirit of prayer, we say, our intention is that we are opened up in this time to hear the words of this ancient text, to hear the words of one another, to respond with care, with compassion, with the desire to seek understanding, and by the grace of the Spirit, to consider new possibilities for ourselves. Amen. With eyes closed and ears open, we will hear the first reading of this selection, Isaiah chapter 42, verses 1 through 17. And for this reading, as you enter into the silence, just reflect on the question, what do I notice?
Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his teaching. Thus says God, the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people upon it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord. That is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. See, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Sing to the Lord a new song, his praise from the end of the earth. Let the sea roar and all that fills it, the coastlands and their inhabitants. Let the desert and its towns lift up their voice, the villages that Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing for joy. Let them shout from the tops of the mountains. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise in the coastlands. The Lord goes forth like a soldier, like a warrior. He stirs up his fury. He cries out. He shouts aloud. He shows himself mighty against his foes. For a long time I have held my peace. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all their herbage. I will turn the rivers into islands and dry up the pools. I will lead the blind by a road they do not know. By paths they have not known, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are the things I will do, and I will not forsake them. They shall be turned back and utterly put to shame, those who trust in carved images, who say to cast images, you are our gods.
During the second reading, and in the silence that follows, reflect on this question. What is it in the text that draws me in? What is it that pushes me away? And what is it that leaves me wondering? Carlos.
Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his teaching. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what becomes from it, who gives breath to the people upon it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. See, the former things have come to pass. The new things are now declared. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Sing to the Lord a new song, his praise from the end of the earth. Let the sea roar and all that fills it, and the coastlands and their inhabitants. Let the desert and the towns lift up their voice, the villages that Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing for joy. Let them shout from the tops of the mountains. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise in the coastlands. The Lord goes forth like a soldier, like a warrior. He stirs up his fury. He cries out. He shouts aloud. He shows himself mighty against his foes. For a long time I have held my peace. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all the herbage. I will turn the rivers into islands and dry up the pools. I will lead the blind by a road they do not know, by paths they have not known. I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are the things I will do, and I will not forsake them. They shall be turned back and utterly put to shame those who trust in carved images, who say to cast images, you are our God.
So, what arose for you in reflecting on this text?
Scary God. Reminds me of someone I read about all the time. I am powerful. I can do all these things. I can do all these destructive things. See how good I am. See how powerful I am.
So there's a response of reaction against the image of God in the
This
passage.
image of God, yes.
Mhm. You want to have a similar engagement with it? Okay. They want to have the opposite. Okay, so there's the invitation, a kind of some healing, some restoration in there as well. I'm wondering, for whom might the scary God be comforting as well? When you think about the potential audience addressed originally or in later contexts. What else arises?
I guess in the beginning part, because it resonates with my own sense of how justice is achieved, I appreciated the sense of the servant is not crying or lifting up the voice and making it heard in the street, but it's just like this faithful, persistent, keep working at it kind of dynamic, and then it moves into more of the really big movement from the God figure, both in terms of the big movement around what could be destroyed, but also the big movement around what could be created. So to me, it was kind of a balance between the steady, quiet persistence versus the vision of what could be, which is, larger, grander sweep.
So I wonder about that. I figured people might have various reactions to the description of the servant and how the servant goes about achieving these ends. And I think especially looking at verse 2, he will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street, is a very different methodology from what many of us have practiced or used to or expect. Doesn't seem like the servant is encouraging the march down the street to the Supreme Court or anything like that. And so it's interesting. For me, it raises the question about why strategies or tactics are employed and what is the basis for them, and how we go about deciding what is either the most effective or the most appropriate practice when we want to achieve some just end. And so it struck me when I was looking at this in preparation for this time, quite a contrast to maybe often expected practices of activism. And so that was interesting to me, but it's interesting that you saw a congruence with your own sense of how justice is achieved. And so that's fascinating, because I wondered if there might be some responses to the text like, no, we get out of the streets and our voice needs to be heard, and we cry out. What was the video of the Kavanaugh protest where it was like the primal scream, in a sense, the women uttered?
I guess I feel like maybe it's because of media or whatever. I feel like that gets mistaken for what the sum of activism is, and that it's giving a voice. It's not that giving a voice is bad, but I do think that we have between now and November 6th to do some very quieter, detailed, get out the vote work, and it's the part about being bruised but not breaking, and just continuing to show up. Justice doesn't get created by a large outcry. There's not
Right.
which doesn't work. What?
So what I hear in your comment is less about crying and more about the short burst of a cry versus the dimly burning wick that goes on, that it doesn't just stop there. And I think for me, relevant to that and trying to understand this kind of God is the evaluation of who gets to cry and when. Because I hear in that first passage, God telling his servant, don't cry, you're going to behave in this the way I tell you to. But stay in your lane. Right, stay in your lane. And yet in verse 14, I mean, this, I'm just going to be real, this stuff makes me so angry. In verse 14, despite denigrating women in all the ways that we know show up in these kinds of texts, and the idea that who he's really speaking to is this male servant to carry things out, that God decides he's allowed to cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. So the crying, the emotional power of that, God gets to do in his act of creation, because he gets to do whatever the fuck he wants. But in the beginning, he'll tell you how you need to express your emotions. And then for me, it's also this kind of like, really, you don't want to mention anywhere women except to try and take power from the one thing that they can do that you can't, namely give birth in this way. So even that metaphor you want to co-opt. I mean, I really appreciate the instructions to keep everything, because I think there was a time in my life when I would read something like this and I would want to scan through with like a red editing pen, and you change the pronouns and you do some of these things and but that's not really possible.
No, that's against the rules.
Yeah, it's against. Well, and I think it distances me from any actual exegesis or any actual engagement from the text, because then you're stepping back with the editor hat on. And so when I don't do that, I get angrier. But it's still like, that's what I see there. Who gets to cry and why, and who gets to take the story of crying in a way that's honorable, and versus when it's, what women do in their messiness.
When I read the part, I felt like the text is lifting up, the Lord goes forth like a soldier, is like a very male image around it. And then, essentially the Lord is going forth as a woman in labor. So to me, it was a balance of the two that then led to the vision of what could be created by the powerfulness of those actions.
I see God. Well, see, being that I'm a Taoist, I see God as both male and female. I know that's not what it's meant here, but it could be, because in Jewish mysticism, there is a female and a male side to God. There's the Elohim and there's the Shekinah.
Yeah, well, I appreciate, Elle, the way you raised that question about, in a sense, the appropriation of feminine imagery. And then Linda can come back and say, well, okay, maybe there's a positive way of looking at it, and there's that give and take about it. But I think that's helpful, Elle, what you have named, because I think a lot of times when people approach passages in the Bible that ascribe feminine imagery to God, it's merely a rush to say, look, this is something positive. Look, see, God is both, as depicted here, that there are these feminine and maternal metaphors and so on, and see that this isn't just entirely patriarchal. And you're like, well, wait a second, but maybe it is appropriation when the figure of God is still primarily male-oriented, with the metaphors and language and everything in the Old Testament.
God is mansplaining.
He's got mansplaining how a woman is in labor. Okay, yeah. So there's that danger, right? Yeah, indeed. So part of the tension in exploring all the different possible shadings of the text and where we might approach it. Then, as Lindy said, in a sense, it's interesting that also the crying out of labor pains is in the midst of kind of also this fierce imagery. That it goes from the Lord goes forth like a soldier and doesn't immediately go to laying waste the mountains and hills, but interjects the labor pains in it. And I'm not sure what to do with that, but I feel like that's important to note as well. What do we see?
I see God trying to establish his authority. I am the one that's powerful.
Mhm.
I have authority over me. You better listen to me and forget about all those idols.
Mhm.
And this is his attempt, and it's a very masculine, his attempt to establish that authority. And in that time and in that place, maybe what they thought had to be done in order to establish authority.
I think because of the time that this was written in, there was that need because all around them, the surrounding countries around them they were idol worshippers, and so this is their political way of saying, okay, we're different.
Mhm.
I was thinking about in terms of idol worship. I'm just trying to absorb the most recent statement from all the scientists through the UN about how short a window of time we have
Mhm.
to radically turn into a completely different way of structuring our economy. And I feel like the current economy is like our carved image. It's our idol, that it's something that we do worship. We're a part of it. We have a hard time imagining anything really different from that. And when I look at the image you see here about drying up the rivers, and whoa, this is a little close for comfort. So, calling us towards what is life, and how do we find that deeper truth that's not tied up with whatever our idol is in the moment. And it's sort of, I know that when this was written, there was more of a sense of objecting to the pagans. But I do think that there's something about worshiping something that's not ultimate that leads us down a difficult path.
What's the Tillichian definition of God? What is of ultimate concern to you? And so a false God is what should not be ultimate, placed in that position. A little bit on the context. This is one of 4 of the servant songs in Isaiah, in which the text speaks of this chosen servant of God. And the interpretive question has always been, well, who is the servant supposed to be? Well, traditional Christian exegesis would say it's Jesus. And in fact, Isaiah 42 is quoted in Matthew chapter 12 as being in some way fulfilled by Jesus's healing ministry. In terms of critical scholarship, there have been basically 2 opinions that the servant is meant as an individual and often understood as referring perhaps to a prophetic figure like Isaiah himself. But the most common reading, and I think one best supported by the text, especially if you look at a song like Isaiah 49, another one of the servant songs, is that it refers collectively to the faithful of Israel who will answer God's call and act accordingly, who will heed the commands, who will fulfill the covenant. And Isaiah 49 specifically says, "My servant Israel." So it's a call to a people to embrace and enact a certain vision of who they are to be. Is believed in this context, historically, for Isaiah 42, it's coming after the Babylonian conquest of Judah and the deportation of many of the people to Babylon, and then after the Persian takeover, their subsequent return. And Isaiah has this rather universalistic vision of not just restoring the nation, but now that you will be the light, you will be the witnesses, and go out to the rest of the world, you'll teach them my ways. And so this is the beginning of a sense that there's a mission from this particular people to the rest of the world. And so I think it's helpful to name that for the context as we think about our points of connection with this text.
It's sort of chill, you do you, I've got this.
What's that?
It's chill to the servant,
Uh-huh.
you do you,
Mm-hmm.
I've got this. Because he's asking for trust, like the
Yeah.
blind who are led to a place that they do not know.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's going to make, I'm talking about God as he, and that's not really my theology, but that's how it's in the text.
Sure.
And so the Lord is going to make it smooth, turning the darkness into light.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I've got this, you can relax.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I wonder then, thinking again back to best practices, if we're trying to think about the contemporary analog, what it means to be the servant seeking justice here and now. And Lindy raised the point of connection as she saw it with contemporary work. And I want to think particularly on verse 3, I'm drawn to that imagery there and wondering what that might suggest to you in whatever it is that you're trying to fulfill, your sense of call, your sense of duty, your sense to act. What does it mean to act in such a way that a bruised reed you will not break and a dimly burning wick you will not quench? What does that look like?
Why does it matter if the reed's broken?
Maybe that it's bruised so it could be easily broken.
Yeah,
So
but
you're so gentle with it that even though it's close to breaking, it still won't.
But why do we care?
What do you care about the
Do we
reed?
know the context for the reed?
I don't know like specific context what the reed would have been used for.
It's a metaphor. A bruised reed is a person that's
Mm-hmm.
in some stress,
But why a reed? That's,
because there were lots of them growing in the.
yeah, but if there's a lot, then it doesn't matter, like 1 or 2 broken, no big deal. So I'm wondering if there's a purpose for the reed, like, like are they made into paper, or is it a reed like a musical instrument reed? Is it like what's the point of keeping the reeds nice? I'm not
Yeah,
trying to hijack.
No,
I'm
no, no,
It's
Something
like,
that's
yeah,
trying to live.
like it just, yeah.
It has its own dignity in itself. It's trying to live. Not broken head.
Right.
And
Still alive.
it's
But
something
reed
or
makes
a
more sense to
person
me.
that is not whole in some fashion. And other time when you might throw the imperfect child into the river. The dimly burning wick you will not quench.
That makes more sense to me.
I see with both of those, like I think the imagery draws up the why care question. Okay, this wick isn't working. This candle, throw it out, get the next one, right? This reed is bruised, pick up another one. Um, and so I think, for me at least, I can see the metaphor of these easily disposable objects being used to make us think about how we treat others. I remember at my college when we were having this hard kind of shift to the right as these conservative Southern Baptist trustees were being appointed, and one of the trustees actually used the line, "You have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet." I'm seeing like my professors being slandered, and just think about like, what kind of sort of callousness you have to work in to undertake certain actions to achieve whatever goal you so desire. And so I think about that metaphor and that context and look at this, like, okay, when do we turn people into the bruised reed and the dimly burning wick that we can just say, okay, well, toss you, I'll work with those who can be saved, or those who can be convinced, or those who are like me, or whatever, and start making the judgments about that.
Yeah, but there's a difference because the bruised reed you will not break. Okay, that might be by just ignoring the bruised reed that you don't break it. That you not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily take active agency to not break the reed. Whereas the wick, that could be a lot of work to encourage the wick and encourage the flame. Like you could spend a lot of time on that and encourage it and build it up. Whereas the other one, you could basically do nothing and achieve the same end. So they're two very different images to my mind.
But it says the dimly burning wick he will not quench.
Right.
Doesn't say he's going to try to make it brighter.
Well, that's
Just
true.
Just going to leave it burning
In
dimly.
a dimly, yeah, that's true. My experience with dimly burning weed is that if you leave them alone, they do burn out. But they don't keep going dimly.
So I remember back in 2000 when the first time marriage equality was on the ballot in California, this time to amend the family code, not the Constitution. And we lost by 67% to 23%. That's pretty much a wipeout. And it was very hard to absorb that many people would vote that way. And the phrase that has stuck with me ever since then, from Evan Wolfson from Freedom to Marry out of New York, was he said, the movements have to learn how to lose forward. Because through all of that work that happened, we lost. We have a whole lot more lists, a whole lot more organizers, a whole lot more understanding of how to communicate with people, what works, what doesn't work. And so then, that rolled forward, and we are in a different place historically now than we were. So to me, this part is about the sustaining, even in the points of weakness, are not necessarily the end. There's a space in there where something of life can come forward from a place that's quite weak.
There's a remarkable statement, I can't quote, but in California, when the women were trying to get the vote, and they did everything they could conceive of, trying to get hold of the vote. The vote was, of course, by the men, because they didn't have the vote. But the women lost. And they put out a resolution saying, it's an unenlightened people, essentially, didn't give us the right to vote, but we will go on. We will proceed, and we will succeed. And they did, of course, in 1913. But they then took this sort of bruised reed and dimly lit wick by their feeling of these men who would not give him the vote, saying that's the way it was shown then. We will persevere. And the Unitarian minister, Universalist and Unitarian minister, was one of the leaders.
I'm struck by in verses 10, 11, and 10 and 11, the let the sea roar, let the desert and its towns. I guess I'm just realizing that that nature has a voice here, that it's not just the people or the towns. It's the desert lifting up its voice. It's the voice of the sea. And I was thinking about, I read the UN report yesterday and watching more videos of the sea ice in the Arctic over the past 10 years, and just wondering where that voice for the earth is. Because I'm a scientist, pictures and data and SPS, that helps, but it might be, I guess my hope is that the point of no return and more fires and more hurricanes, that we can find other ways to let that voice be heard besides the point when people just can't avoid hearing it.
Chris, do you know what the villages that Kedar inhabits is about?
I have to consult an atlas.
Not necessarily where it is, but he's got something in mind about the people in Kedar
Yeah, I wonder,
and Sarah.
it's interesting because historically Israel was stuck in the middle. Much of the coast was given over to the Philistines, and then the desert across the Jordan would have been Edom, Moab, kind of rivals and enemies of Israel. So I wonder if this is connected back to the previous verses about being a covenant to the people and a light to the nations. And so in a sense, starting with those surrounding, they will hear and respond to the message. So it's beginning with the immediate frontier. Yeah. Well, knowing that our time is drawing to a close, close us out with this ritual. I want to thank Elle for the beautiful decorations for our autumnal altar table. And I think it's appropriate to pick up then a rose petal for those of us who are present. I'm struck by how, well, in my interpretive gloss, roses are very annoying to grow. I'm in my third home since graduating from divinity school, third home in my kind of married, fully adult life. And there have been rose bushes at every single home that someone before me has planted. And so I have the joy and complete and total annoyance of caring for these rose bushes, which is difficult. You have to prune them carefully so they look beautiful and grow well, and they will get black spots and insects pests on them, and then you're trying to tend them and they're stabbing you with their thorns. So to me, it's a reminder that that cultivating beauty can be a difficult and painful, annoying process, perhaps one that begun before we arrived, and yet here we are with the responsibility. We are servants. So holding the rose petal, take a moment to contemplate how you are a servant of justice in the midst of the challenges and the difficulties that you face. Going forth, may we heed the call to be a light unto others, to receive the light from others, not to break the bruised reed or quench the dimly burning wick. Amen.